Hey everybody, I just want to add this extra quick segment. This is something I wanted to cover in my review and I completely forgot to cover my review. So I'm basically shooting this without my nice camera equipment, without my nice sound equipment, and I'm basically going to have to figure out a way to kind of sneak this into the video that's not going to make absolute nonsense. But anyways, here it goes. There's one point I was trying to make in my video review and I kind of glossed over and didn't really make the point, and it's very important for me to add this to the video review. So I need to add these comments in here, and it's going to add a lot of context to my actual review for Hyperborea. When Hyperborea first came out, there was a lot of talk about the game. There was a lot of negative press the game got, and I was one of the people who fell victim to all that negative press. And even though the game mechanics looked like something I'd be really interested in, the gameplay looked like something I'd be really interested in, the constant bad press the game kept getting from various reviewers, various written reviews, various video reviews, kind of made me hesitate, and over and over and over I forgot to just buy the game. I eventually got to the point where I'm like, I've had it on my wish list for 6 months, I'm not going to buy the game. Then I had the fantastic fortune of, through one of my meetups, to get a chance to play the game, and I was extremely impressed with the game the first time I played it. The first time I played it, I played a 6-player game full of people with AP, full of people who had never played the game before, and even with all those negatives, I had a heck of a great time playing the game. So I just want to say one thing to all those reviewers who gave the game the bad reviews that made me wait so long to get the game. I have one comment for all of you. Hyperborea is a game that is trying its hardest to shoot itself in the foot. It's kind of like hugging a porcupine. The first couple of times you do it, it's going to hurt while you're getting impaled by the quills. But eventually all the quills are going to be broken away, and then after that you kind of get to the good stuff. Now how is that for the strangest analogy you've probably heard of all day? With Hyperborea, here we have this possible top 10 contender for best games from 2014, and the game has been completely marred by the simple fact that in board gaming, as in real life, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And that's probably the biggest knock I can ever give against Hyperborea. You have this fantastic game that I can guarantee most of the people who play this game, especially the people who said that the game was terrible, I can guarantee you they played the game and experienced all the knocks that came in with the game that were just part of bad planning, bad structure, and possibly falling victim to bad rulebook writing, which caused a lot of problems, causing a lot of people to never give this game a second chance. And that's the worst thing I can say, because if you give this game a second chance, you're going to find out that this is a fantastic game in my top 10 from 2014. So now that we got that out of the way, what do we have here with Hyperborea? Well, with Hyperborea, we have a fantastic, lighter civilization style game. I'm not going to say it's a 4X or a civ building game, because this is definitely a civilization war game, but you have some really cool things that this game has brought to the table. First of all, you have the bag building mechanics, which is where you're going to take these cubes and you're going to place them in the bag, and they're going to allow you to pull these cubes out. They're going to give you access to various different techs and everything like that. And if you've never played a bag building game and you're starting to think to yourself, well, what's the difference between a bag building game and your average deck builder like Thunderstone, Dominion, or Trains, or the multi-millions of almost seeming different deck builders out there? Well, the big difference here is that in a bag building game, while the general idea is the same, you're basically pulling out cubes, which could have been replaced with cards in a way, but when you play with cubes, it plays out just a little bit differently, and it's really hard to explain how it's different unless you play it. I know that sounds like I'm doing a cop-out here, but I'm really not. If you played a cube builder, you will understand how this is different from a deck builder game, because in a game such as Hyperborea, it's much, much easier to count the cubes you have in your bag and keep track of them, because as opposed to a game such as Dominion, where you may get 20 cards, 25 cards or more, or Thunderstone, where it's easy to get 30 cards in your deck, where it starts getting much, much harder to watch what your deck is building up to and watch what your opponent's decks are building up to. And Hyperborea is much different, because in your average game, you're probably not going to get much more than 15 to 20 cubes. And while it's possible to get more cubes than that, that's actually goes against the strategy of the game. So your average strategy, what you're going to be playing for, is you're going to want to have about 15 cubes in your bag at all time. And believe it or not, tracking 15 cubes in your bag is a lot easier than trying to track about 30 cubes. So now you have the first part of the cool thing about this game. It's easier to strategize because you know what kind of cubes or cards, but we're going to call them cubes because it's a bag building game. You can track which cubes are coming up and kind of pay attention, because you don't have a discard pile. And that's the second really cool thing about this game. If I take out my cubes and I start placing these cubes on my techs and doing my various things and the various actions I get to do, I can constantly look at my board and go, okay, I know I have 3 yellow cubes. I've bought 3 yellow cubes for my game. I see 1 yellow cube on my board. I know for a fact that means I still have 2 yellow cubes on my bag. I can plan for that because I can watch what's going on here. The cool thing that adds on to this that's even cooler about this game, why I like the bag building mechanics better than your average deck building game, is because while I'm watching my cubes, I'm watching my opponent's cubes, because again, everybody has less cubes or less cards to use the correlation between the two. So I can kind of watch what my opponents are doing, and I can see on my opponent's board that they may have a blue, an orange, and a yellow out, and notice that they don't have any reds out. I know that they purchased 2 reds during their turn, so I know they have at least 3 reds in their bag. I know that they're standing right outside one of my cities or outside one of my territories that I have control of, so I know that they're possibly 1 or 2 rounds away from pulling out a green cube to get the movement to come in and start stomping and taking out my armies and destroying my units. So that's the best way I can describe it of why I think bag building, for me, at least right now, I know it's the new cool kid on the block, but for me, bag building with these cubes for some reason is just clicking a heck of a lot better than your average deck building game. So now you know what I think is so cool about the bag building concept. So what's so cool about Hyperborea? We got a cool mechanic, but is the game that goes along with it also pretty cool? And I'm going to say yes, Hyperborea is very, very cool because I like the way they designed the game, the design decisions they made, and I like how even though you definitely feel the Euro influences in this game, you definitely also feel the other side of the pond that allows you to do other things that you don't find in your typical Euro game. The very big thing I can point out in this game is that this game allows war, it allows direct conflict, and it allows you to destroy your opponent's units and remove them from the board. Here's the kind of cool mechanic I like that they threw in there on top of this though. It behooves you to not pick on one weaker neighbor for the simple fact that you're not going to score victory points. And the only thing you're actually doing when you pick on a weaker neighbor repeatedly is you're actually hindering yourself because you're not having any growth. You're spending all your actions attacking that weaker neighbor for 0 reward. And why does the game work like that? Well, for the simple fact that I can keep attacking green player dozens and dozens of times, continuously attacking the green player, repeatedly pulling off his units off the board, but he's going to get the nice reimbursement of the fact that at the start of every one of his turns, he's going to get at least 3 green guys to come back on his board for free. I'm not getting victory points for attacking these green guys repeatedly, so again, I'm wasting my time. So what has this game done to kind of force you to balance everything out? It's forced you that you can't simply pick on one player repeatedly. You can pick on one player once and destroy one of their units, but then you need to go after another opponent because you want to get one of their units. You need to get a complete set of everybody's units before you can go back to being a jerk and start picking on everybody over and over again, because at that point you can pick on everybody as much as you want and start getting lots of cool victory points. And that's a really cool war mechanic I really like. I also like the fact that the war mechanic in this game is nice and simple, enough to the point where it's not slowing down the game, but it's direct enough and understandable enough that anybody can look at the other player's cubes, see what they have available, because remember, you get to know what your next opponent is going to do before they get to even watch you finish your turn, because you see what 3 cubes your opponent has. Now, unless they have one of these discs that are going to give them extra draws out of the bag, or if they have extra techs that are going to give them extra draws, those are the only thing that's going to matter. So for the most part, unless they have a trick up their sleeve, you always have a rough idea what your opponent is going to do next. So you can track and watch how much attack potential your opponent is possibly going to get, watch and track how much defensive potential you can have, and it's a nice back and forth balancing game that they've done a very fantastic job of creating, and it's another mechanic that I think is absolutely fantastic in Hyperborea. Hyperborea is a very asymmetrical game. It has 6 different races. Each different race has 2 different powers, and those powers are going to basically fit in with what your race is. You have the red aggressive race. You have 2 different powers. One allows you to attack better. The other one also allows you to attack better, pretty much. But it does it in a different way, so don't think that they copped out and made it 2 different, cheap, different versions of the same thing. It's not quite the way it works. Then you have your green race. Your green race is really good at getting around the board, whether they get to ignore terrain or if they just get free extra movements. And all 6 of the races have slightly different powers. Add into the fact that you have 4 different tech trees, and now these tech trees, Every single one of these 4 tech trees has their own specialty. You have your 1 tech tree, which is good for movement and combat. You have your 1 tech tree, which is good for getting rid of waste and doing various other things. Every one of these tech trees is going to add extra powers to every single race. And you put this all together in a game that has a different board layout every time you play the game. You have different bonus tiles that are going to come into the game every time you play it. And you have all these asymmetrical race powers. So it's going to go without saying that there's going to be some times when the game is not going to be 100% balanced. And that's one of the negatives that I do have to put towards the game here. Now I know a lack of balance can be sometimes worked around, especially when you have games such as Terra Mystica, a game that has 14 different races in it. And the designers of the game realized that their races were not balanced. So what they did is they put in an auction mechanic in where you get to auction for whatever race you want to play for, and you're going to sacrifice points to get the race that you want in the game. This game doesn't have any kind of mechanic to make up for that. And while you can throw in a mechanic on top of that if you like, and I know some people have done that to some great success, whether you're auctioning victory points out or whatever you want to do have to understand that there are going to be some situations, some player counts, some tech layouts, or just different races versus some races. For example, the red race is much better on lower player count games. Red race in a 2-player game is pretty much going to have a very strong advantage over all the other players. Whereas opposed in a 6-player game, it's much harder for them to start conquering and get the full set of victory points they need to start getting things. So they start balancing out more towards the 6-player spectrum. And every one of these races are going to play differently at certain player counts. And they're basically going to have certain advantages at certain player counts. So you are going to notice occasionally that the asymmetrical races are not balanced every single game. The trick here though is if that you realize that, and you realize what race is good at different player counts, and you know what strategies that race is going to use to abuse their special powers, if you can be ready for them, you can counteract them, and that does help balance things out much better. And I guess it's a good time now to segue into some of the negatives, or as I said earlier, to give the porcupine a hug. Now, this game had a rule book that is probably, I'm going to come out and say it, this is not the best rule book in the world. This rulebook should have came with warnings about player counts. It should have came with warnings about race combinations. It should have came with better descriptions of some of the things. It should have been less ambiguous in some things. And it should have had some better descriptions of the game. I mean, you can look at my rulebook, which is full of Sharpie marker all throughout the rulebook on various sections of things just to better explain how the rules are supposed to work, because there's so many ambiguities in the rules. And the fact that the game needed a 4-page FAQ to fix some of those problems. And in my mind, probably one of the worst offenses that shows that they didn't really plan this rulebook so well. When you have an FAQ that tells you to take one entire section of the rules, pull that rule out of the game and pretend it doesn't exist anymore, well, that either tells you that there was a really bad translation, or the game was kind of rushed out the door, or something else happened. Either way, I think that's the biggest problem that Hyperborea ever encountered. I think too many people read the rulebook as it was, got frustrated with the rulebook, or they decided to play with the one rule that was eventually pulled out of the rule book, and whether that was supposed to be there or not is irrelevant at that point. But pulling out that rule out of the rule book does make a big difference in the way the game plays. It changes the strategy of the game quite a bit, and pulling that rule out of the rule book makes the game even better. So hugging that porcupine again, if you can get past all those terrible quills, that terrible rule book, watch my video if you have to. If you get past all that, you can see that beneath all that, you're looking at a fantastic game. I do have a couple of caveats about the game though. Just go through them really quickly. First of all, the first time you play this game with all new players, don't play this game with 5 or 6 players. That should have been in big bold letters across the top of this rule book saying the first time you play this game, don't play with 6 players unless you hate every single person you're sitting down at the table with, because you're going to be in for the longest, most boring, most dreadful game of Hyperborea you'll probably ever play. Now, having said that though, if you sit down this game with 5 or 6 players who are experienced and understand the game, this game is awesome with 6 players because turns go quickly. Because remember what I said earlier about the fact that you see your cubes on the board and you see everybody else's cubes on the board? That means that you know what your actions are usually before your turn comes around. You know what your opponent's actions are before their turns comes around. And that also means that you're going to be moving and doing your actions very quickly because you've already decided what you're going to do kind of in advance, barring the discovery of any of these runes tokens that may slow you down a little bit on some of your decisions, barring your opponents using abilities that are going to give them extra skills or extra cubes to put on the board, or barring your opponents picking up extra tactics or extra technologies that allow them to do different things. Those may change your strategies, and that's a good thing because that adds to the replay of the game. But do understand that when you play this game with some experienced players, a 5 or 6 player game is still pretty darn awesome. But on the other end of the spectrum, this is one of those rare war-style games, conquest, whatever interactive kind of games you want to call it. The terms escape my brain here at the moment. But this is one of those rare games that as a 2-player game, this game is still really, really awesome. This game plays great all the way up from 2 to 6 players, again, as long as all those players are experienced. And on top of that, I also want to, before I forget to mention, it's awesome that this game has tons and tons of replay built into the game. Every single time you play this game, you're going to use one center tile, and the game does come with 6 different center tiles. The game comes with different race boards that allow you to play the game differently every time you play it. Not only that, you're going to get 6 tiles that come out on the outside, and you see how many tiles there are, ensuring that this game is going to play differently every single time. You have those extra reward little tokens right here for the ruins that you're going to get. The game comes with tons and tons of those, making sure that every single time you play this game, the layout of the board is going to be completely different rewards, completely different appearance of everything, completely different terrain. This game is going to play different every single time you play it, and that's completely, totally fantastic. If you're looking for an asymmetrical, light civilization building game that's going to play differently every time you play it due to various setups of the board, different player powers, different tech trees, a game that's going to reward you the more experience you play it, because the more you play it, the better you're going to be, the better you're going to understand the subtle strategies. Check out Hyperborea. Just one quick minor warning for you. Don't play the short game. The only purpose for the short game is to teach players how to play the game. Once everybody knows how to play it, pretend the short version of the rules have been X'd out of the rule book, much like the rest of the FAQs have done for some of the other rules, and ignore the naysayers. Once everybody knows how to play this game plays great anywhere from 2 all the way up to 6 players. I hope you enjoyed this video review and series for Hyperborea the game. If you have any comments or questions, as always, leave them in the YouTube comments below. Feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews, that's otsbgr@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this video series and you want to see more like it, please subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching. And don't believe what the naysayers say. If everybody knows what they're doing, this game kicks ass with 5 or 6 players quite well.